Hello and welcome to the Mythgard Movie Club for Edward Scissorhands. This is one I know Kat has been really excited about. I have too, although I haven't seen it in quite a while. So I'm actually more excited after having rewatched it. It would be bad if it was the other way around, if I had watched it and then been like, I really don't want to do this. But fortunately, that's not the case. Um, but to start off real quick, as typical announcements, actually late breaking news, not on the announcements screen that we have here. For those who don't know, this afternoon, Corey went to the New Hampshire Board of Education Commission meeting where the only item on the docket was to approve Signum University as an official whatever approval that they give. And in fact, they did so and did so unanimously. So that's very exciting. It's a big step towards all of the things we've been working towards for I don't even know how long, several years now. Yeah, I mean, obviously there's other hurdles to come, but this is a big moment for Signum that given that approval. So very exciting there. Beyond that, we've got two moots. Well, we have more than two moots coming up. The two that are sort of in near focus here is Bay Moot coming up in just a couple of weeks. If you are in the Bay Area, Oakland specifically, although you can travel to it, even if you're just in the area. Go out there. The registration was pushed out to, it ends next Saturday, so you can go ahead and still register for that if you're looking to go. Also, we've got Middle Moot coming up in Kansas City this year. That's coming up in the beginning of October. Corey will be out there, and he'll be at Bay Moot as well, as he's at all the moots. And that one still have some time to register. You can submit your papers if you want to present there, and all the information is out on the Signum University website. Go to signumuniversity.org, and you can get to those right off the main homepage or go to /events. And our fall classes are starting soon. If you have not taken a look, there's the 5 classes we're offering as flex and live classes this fall. You can register for those now. Registration is open, and you can go ahead and sign up for those. And we've also got our Signum Academy. And Sharon, I guess it's appropriate because we had you talking at Movie Club for man, I forgot the title again. I just said it. A Wrinkle in Time. It's right there on my screen. I can't remember.
That's all right.
and that's the next Signum Academy class that's starting up on Monday. Right. So that's a good time. Those have been going really well. If you want to join, you can join. But especially if you know any kids who are in middle school or high school or any age really who are able to read the book and join in the participation, we'd love to have you join. Probably, looking at the attendee list, probably all of you are already joining the Arthur class, but for posterity's sake, I'll mention that. We're only 4 weeks in. We have a hiatus next week, so if you're already behind in the reading, like I am, you may want to take that extra week and catch up on the reading and the recordings that are already out there. But yeah, that's going. We're a little ways into that, and we'll be doing that one for quite a while. There'll probably be several movie clubs where we'll be announcing that one to come, but that's a lot of fun. So lots of stuff going on here at Signum, lots of stuff coming up. Probably by our next movie club, we'll have announcements about our fall fundraising. Of course, you can donate anytime. You don't have to wait till the fall fundraising events, but that'll be coming up soon. So schedule your plans accordingly.
Okay, so just to kind of keep it going with our movie club dates, next up, we have them we had a little bit of a longer break over Mythmoot, but now we sort of have one every month for the rest of the year, which is kind of fun. So, and I also noticed that our slate of space set movies is pretty much over by this point. We had a number of those in a row, and now we have all of these smaller little fantasy and sci-fi movies coming up, starting with tonight. So the next one on September 6th will be Predestination, which I know Curtis really likes, and I have not seen, so I'm excited to watch that. It's based on Robert Heinlein's story, All You Zombies. So for anybody who is interested in checking that out, maybe I'm going to try to read the story ahead of time. That might be a fun thing to do. And so we have a sense of what Heinlein's original story was versus the adaptation. And then after that, we have coming up probably as part of our, fundraiser, we'll try to schedule a time that works because we have Corey joining us for She on October 11th is the plan. And we also have Chris Swank joining us, one of our Signum faculty, who I see is in the attendee list tonight. So she'll be joining us. So we have a half, 50% Mythgard faculty on that particular movie, which will be fun.
I see Arthur saying that's a great story. I'm not sure which story he's referring to. I think maybe the Heinlein. I'm just gonna say it's probably the Heinlein one because it's a great story. But She's also a good story.
Right, and he also said not to confuse it with Her, which is a good candidate for next year's movie club, but that's a completely separate kind of story.
All You Zombies is a good story, and I mean, personally, this is, I think, the best Heinlein adaptation, movie adaptation at least of a Heinlein story. So, I mean, not that there's a lot to choose from, and we don't need to get into that. We'll get into that next time.
We can get into that next time. Yeah, because there's surprisingly few, but yeah.
So that said, we should probably introduce ourselves. This is the part I usually forget, and so we added a slide to make sure I don't forget. So hi, I'm Curtis Wyant, co-host, I guess, here of the Mythgard Movie Club. Also co-host of the podcast with Kat and Kurt's TV Review, where we talk about science fiction and fantasy television, and do a lot of writing and other stuff for clients around the web, but that's the boring stuff. So this is the fun stuff. We'll stick with that.
I guess we'll go down the line. I'm Kat. So yes, Curtis and I co-host both this podcast and also the one that he mentioned, Kat and Kurt's TV Review. And I work in academic administration during the day and moonlight doing that for Signum at night. So if you've ever taken Signum classes, I'm sure you've exchanged emails with me. And have a blog that I don't write in as much as I should, but that's the thing I hope to do more of in the future. So.
Great. And I'm Sharon Hoff, and I'm involved in many aspects of Signum University. I support a lot of people, and I do a lot of things. And if you've ever communicated with us, you've probably communicated with me. Just this morning, I was helping with the Signum Academy reading program. I did a Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe session this morning. So, and I was very happy to be on the panel, as Curtis mentioned, with the Wrinkle in Time movie. And that was a great deal of fun. And so I'm back here with Edward Scissorhands.
Nice. So, Kat, this is your pick. This was basically when we were starting the idea behind the movie club and sort of the planning. Kat was like, we have to do Edward Scissorhands or else. It was that's literally what she said.
Not the way it went at all.
She actually held a scissor up to my throat and no. But yeah, so
with Edward's hand.
I don't want to start at the ending with the I'm not finished yet, but that's kind of where the film begins, right? Of him being not finished and sort of the situation he's in. But I don't know if you had any opening thoughts or words or where you wanted to begin with this. I'm sure you have some thoughts and words to say.
Well, I will just in my own defense, we did have a list that people voted on, and this beat out certain things, among them predestination. So it wasn't all my doing. But yeah, we were trying to think of, when we were trying to fill out our list of candidates, one idea was to go through and pick things from, earlier decades to try to make sure we weren't just choosing things that were recent releases. And when thinking of things for the kind of early 90s and 80s period, this leapt to my mind as a particular favorite. And I've probably rewatched it more often than you, Curtis, perhaps Sharon as well, but I also haven't watched it for a long time. So it was kind of fun to go back. Maybe one kind of opening thing just to kick it off. Arthur already, his first kind of comment here, I think is an interesting one. Just as like a trivia fact, he says that when he noticed in the credits that it was filmed in Lutz, Florida, which apparently he has family there. But just kind of I feel like when you start to look up this movie, a common theme with reviews, but also, critical essays and filmographies and, analysis of this movie is the autobiographical element, which is kind of where I kicked things off here. The idea that, so this drawing that's on the slide there is, the original Edward Scissorhands drawing of Tim Burton's from when he was in high school. So before there was a story even, there was just a character. And people may or may not know that originally he was an animator and worked for Disney during the kind of rough period of the 80s.
And Ralph Bakshi, right?
And Ralph Bakshi, he was an animator on the 78 Lord of the Rings, that's right. And went on to that to do work on things like Fox and the Hound and Black Cauldron, not exactly Disney's golden period, but a great kind of foundation for any animator. But obviously he was frustrated in that, and I don't think his vision, which is clearly very strong, made it through to final cuts very often. So from there he kind of went on into making short films, both animated and live action. That got him noticed by certain people, and it evolved into feature films, getting Pee-wee's Big Adventure being the kind of breakthrough,
Right.
and going on from there into making, revitalizing Batman as a movie franchise, and then Beetlejuice, I guess, being the first kind of original property that he kind of, that had the kind of Tim Burton-esque stamp on it. And Edward Scissorhands was sort of the follow-up to that. So the fact that this is a character from his teenage years, and coupled with the fact that he talks extensively in interviews about the town being very much reminiscent of his childhood home. He grew up in Burbank, California. So I kind of want to get a little bit, we don't have to do it right now, into like exactly what is the time and place of this movie, because I think that could seem like an obvious answer, and then when you think about it, it's less hard to pin down. But I don't know, what kind of thoughts people have, but just as kind of an interesting way into the movie, kind of starting with Burton's sort of weird point of view. And from this one Entertainment Weekly interview, it describes his neighborhood of Burbank, where it's these kind of, it says here, these spick and span hometown houses with a kind of Gothic graveyard at the end of the road that he would hang out in, because people don't bother you if you sit in the graveyard. And so the way that's channeled into this beautiful kind of movie set suburbia with the Gothic manor at the end of the road kind of reflected in the rear view mirror just sort of stuck out to me.
At the and of course it's in a cul-de-sac, or a bag end,
right,
the end of the bag. Yep. So definitely lots of little connections there.
I would think it's rather difficult to pin it to any one time or place, because you have the fresh spick and span, seemingly, if not new, at least very well kept neighborhood. But you have the kids talking about very current electronic devices like CDs and things of that. But then you've also got sort of an interior decorator aesthetic of mid-century modern,
Right.
you know, the boomerang things and the graphics, highly geometric designs, and all the garage doors, don't they have like diamonds on them or something like that all the way down? In a very creepy, almost, in my opinion, Small World kind of way. If you've ever seen the Small World ride at Disneyland, there's a lot of that sort of coloration and geometric designs and things like that. But it's like a hyper realistic in a way. It's not normal in a sense. It's sort of out of the normal because it's too normal, I guess, maybe is what I would say. And even the clothes that these people wear, the double knit polyester, the groovy, weird, slacks that the women are wearing, with the great geometric patterns on them. And even their makeup is very like 50s, 60s kind of thing. So it's all over the place.
Right. So, yeah, I guess that's kind of a question we can kind of extrapolate from Tim Burton's childhood and say, this is California in the 50s or something, or the 60s,
50s,
with that kind
70s, and now 80s with the van and the technology. It's an amalgam
so
of all those.
It's not really tied to any one time period.
I was going to say, it's like those mashup, like top 40 radio stations. It's like 50s, 60s, 70s, and today.
Right.
Today being the late 80s, early 90s.
Right. Well, we can say when they lump that all into classic rock, and it's like this band's 50 years worth of, it's like, the kind of Twilight Zone version of,
very much.
kind of mid-century America.
Yeah.
And actually, even I think on Twitter, Curtis said like the waterbed and the Avon door-to-door like feel very dated to a specific time. And my response is like, even the actors feel dated to a specific time. I mean, Wynona Ryder and Anthony Michael Hall have become so synonymous with that late 80s kind of high school movie time. To the extent that Wynona Ryder now is cast in movies that are about 80s nostalgia.
Right now she's the mom in Stranger Things and that kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, which I feel like, there are those actors who feel timeless, that you're like, they don't necessarily feel like they belong today, that they can easily go into period pieces and you're never quite sure like what age they feel from. Wynona Ryder doesn't feel that way to me. She feels, and I feel like that would have been true even at the time. If you're Tim Burton and you're casting this movie, I feel like to cast actors from Heathers and 16 Candles says something about how you want it to be contemporary to now. Like these are high schoolers from the last 5 or 10 years of high school drama movies.
Yeah, and they were, let's face it, they were also not really developed. They were plunked down to be that, not anything else. Yeah.
Although, and one of the articles I read pointed this out, that even though they are kind of iconic, they play against type. That, Anthony Michael Hall was the nerd and the geek. And here he's the sort of jock bully. And, Wynona Ryder was known for Heathers and Beetlejuice, where she's the weird goth intellectual girl, not the kind of blonde prom queen that she cheerleader that she seems to be here. Yeah.
And was Heathers before this? I can't remember.
It was late 80s.
Okay. And this is 90, I think, right?
This is 90. Yep.
Yeah.
And I mean, thinking sequentially, then it's before the gritty, turning adult realism of like Reality Bites,
right?
Like, which is kind of an interesting. I mean, just thinking. I mean, I know we talk later about sort of the mashup of you know, the Gothic and the suburban, you know, sort of aesthetics here. But like, just thinking about like 1990, is that, you know, between the, you know, sort of feathered hair and like, you know, all of that, and like the 90s sort of grunge scene of like, you know, just thinking of pop culture in general. It's kind of a interesting sort of mix.
Well,
You know,
interestingly, I mean, Tim Burton though didn't dip into that, did he? You know, that sort of realism, that scene. I mean, did he kind of switched from this to
well, I mean, there's
fiction
the
and
Batman.
you know, that kind of thing, right?
I'm sorry, I over talked you a little.
Sorry, he kind of rolled out of sort of the realism into the animation and the stop motion and things like that pretty quickly, didn't he?
So
I don't
think
remember the years.
I think the exception to that, although it isn't the certainly 90s realism, and I don't know that we could call it realism, but Ed Wood as a follow-up.
Right.
If anybody's not seen that, go see it. It's great. And so that's set in the 50s, and is heightened like this is, but it's, you know, maybe the only one of his movies to be not really a fantasy at all. Or the only one, well, Big Eyes recently, I guess, wasn't either. But, you know, I guess they're the two that are just like period pieces.
Right.
And they have sort of the goofy, heightened realism aspects of it. But I guess you could see that as being a more realistic story.
Yeah. Well, I would also, you know, to bring it back to what we were talking about, the neighborhood, the suburbia where it's set, it is, in a sense, if you're looking at, you know, the Gothic or anything like that, it's almost unrealistic. It's hyper, like we were saying, hyper realistic, so that we find things that are very recognizable about these neighborhoods, and we can see the mashup of the times, the you know, maybe 50s, 60s through to the 80s, but it's very unrealistic. It's very sort of creepy and odd and unusual. And so I would say that, you know, I don't think anything about this, obviously. It's not like the Gothic castle at the end of the road is any less odd or out of place than this neighborhood. They're both in balance of being out of place or other place, if you will.
Right. And then I guess that's where his sort of semi-autobiographical part comes in, and where you kind of, Edward is, you know, I guess meant to be as much a point of view as anybody else in the movie. You know, you could very much identify with Edward, who finds this place as bizarre as people find him. Just checking on if we have any questions here.
I didn't see any questions. So Arthur brought up the idea of, you know, suburban conformity, which we'll have a couple images on the next slide. Maybe that highlight that a little bit more. Kat, when you were talking about the actors, it made me, so when I was out, the research I was doing on Wikipedia was I sort of noted some of the actors who could have portrayed Edward, or who were approached. So apparently the studio wanted Tom Cruise. And then also like Tom Hanks and Gary Oldman were both approached and both turned down the role, apparently. And just thinking about like what you were saying with regards to the portrayal there, like, I mean, I think all three of those have done, you know, quite a bit of like different roles. I mean, certainly Tom Hanks has certainly done a wide range, but I just don't see him doing this kind of role at all. Like there's almost I don't know, even though you have these actors who maybe are very good at like these character parts. Like I just don't. I mean, of course, we don't have what they would have done with it, so it's easy for me to say that. But I don't know. Any thoughts there on on like maybe how this movie could have turned out, and not necessarily in a good way?
I think of that. Well, you know what? I think of that lineup. I think Gary Oldman could have pulled it off in his own way, but I read an article where he really did not understand the brief. He really did not understand the movie at all. And just a few moments into the film, I think even just past the credits or something, he said, "Oh, I get it now." And so he had turned it down. And I do think that he would have brought something different to it. But I think he could have pulled that off. I really do. But I think that what helped is I realized that Johnny Depp had the history of 21 Jump Street and that sort of thing behind him. But as a film actor, he didn't really have any baggage that he was bringing to the role. And if anything, 21 Jump Street, he was a character. He was a teeny bopper heartthrob kind of a thing, a very pretty person. I think, though, that it didn't hurt him because it was, he's playing the, I guess if you're looking at the Gothic, he's playing the hero. He's playing the love interest, if there is such a thing in this film. And so that didn't hurt his performance. And so I think that so that would have kind of gone against him or if we looked at Tom Cruise or if we saw Tom Hanks in these roles, they already had such a package behind them, roles behind them, that I think it would have made it a completely different feel to the film. So
yeah, it's hard to imagine Tom Hanks as anything other than the everyman. I don't know. Maybe that's just because he's never done it, and maybe we would all be surprised if he had, and maybe that would have taken his career in a time like completely different direction. But that's just, I feel like this is a level of eccentricity that I don't know, that doesn't seem like has ever been a part of his repertoire, as far as I can tell. And that's what I think Gary Oldman probably shares.
Right.
I'm a big Gary Oldman fan, although I do think that subtlety and smallness are very much a part of this performance, and that would be my big question mark is, especially if he didn't necessarily understand the tone of it, would be overplaying it as something more monstrous than it needs to be, and getting the kind of sweetness and the very little subtleties of I don't know. Johnny Depp is one of those actors who will reference really random things that you wouldn't think of, like the Tin Man as an inspiration for Ed Wood. Like, okay, but it works. And things in here were referenced, like looks that your dogs make. What's the nicest dog you've ever had? And that's the facial expression he wants to evoke. And that's the kind of, those little things, those little touches, I think are really keep the performance very small and very light. That plays against the bigness of the hair and the makeup and the world, and everything around it is huge. And he's just very small within that. So I think it was the right call. I'm glad it went the way that it did.
And I did read that is what the screenwriter thought of, and she communicated that. I can't remember now if she told it to him beforehand or not, but it was that she was envisioning her favorite and her best and most gentlest dog, and that was the expression and the eyes and just what can I do for you kind of expression coming through that he really captured. And again, would that have come through with those other actors? I think Johnny Depp was he really, the way he portrayed Edward shaped the movie profoundly.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I mean, so there's a few comments around Tom Hanks in particular. Arthur saying, he had that Hanks had a very goofy quality, as in Bosom Buddies, that might have worked. I wonder though
Is Edward goofy though?
if the goofiness and the sincerity would work at the same time, like, because those are almost two competing. Because I think there is, I do think there is a goofiness to Edward in a sense, but there's an earnestness to it as well that I think I find it hard to think that Tom Hanks could have done both of those things. And then Deborah's saying Tom Hanks didn't really start branching out until Forrest Gump. I think that's right. I can't think of anything before that. That would.
Didn't he do Big before Forrest Gump?
Yeah, I guess it depends on what you consider branching out.
I still think of both of those as Everyman. Even Forrest Gump, for all that he's different, is still sort of boy next door. And I'm not saying clearly it, requires talent and range to play that part. And there are people that don't like Forrest Gump. I love Forrest Gump. So like nothing against Tom Hanks as an actor, but I don't know that I would put that in the same camp as this type of performance.
Yeah, and I wonder if with Tom Hanks at that point in his career, and as Curtis was saying, what he was known for, I don't know. There are the funny moments when Edward, has trouble with his hands and pokes the mattress and stuff. But none of them are knee slapping funny. They're not. There's always that tinge of awkwardness and oh no and there's an uncomfortable aspect to almost every comedic moment in the film, and I'm not sure that Tom Hanks would have captured that, because I think that we'd be primed just to be laughing and so not sure.
It's an interesting. It's hard to say without actually seeing their performance, though. Who knows? Maybe I kind of feel like if one of them had done it, that could have been an entirely different avenue of their career.
Not Tom Cruise.
Agreed, not Tom Cruise. That was clearly the studio choice.
Yeah, it was, and Burton apparently put the kibosh on that pretty quickly. So, all right, well, I mean, we talked about the Everyman. Is this every town where we are? Is there a name for the town? Do they ever say, like, I don't remember.
I don't think so.
There's no indication, there's no letters or anything that we
I can't even think whether the cheerleading outfits have names on them or anything.
Right, it's like high school or something. Or like initials.
I'm wondering though, the television station might have had some call letters, and I think they referred to them to something. The station. Maybe. We'd have to go back and look.
But even thinking about that interview, they're like, how has it been going since you've been here in town? Like it's like very general. It's not.
Or he came from far away, to come into town.
Well,
he came one block
up the hill.
Like that's the other thing. Is like I threw in there the last question there. Like, does nobody until Peg looks in her rearview mirror, does literally nobody see this huge Gothic rundown mansion at the top of the hill? Like he's part of the town technically, I'm sure.
And do the kids? I mean, because usually kids will have some sort of a superstition or the local stories about the house on the hill. And I don't even think the kids, I think they say he's from that creepy mansion on the hill or something like that, but they don't, come on, that's a prime place for challenging your friends to go up and ring the doorbell, knock on the door, steal something, throw a rock through the window, whatever. That's normal. That would be every town. But the fact, like you say, it's the elephant on the edge of town that nobody talks about. And not because it doesn't seem like they're averse to it or there's an aversion to it. It's like a blind spot. It's a total blind spot that's there looming over them all, and nobody sees it. It's just not even there.
If this were Doctor Who, it would be a perception filter. There's like
Right.
something,
Absolutely.
it's right there, and there's something blocking your
Sure.
ability to compute.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And there's no stories about the creepy guy who lives up there who builds things, and he's
Right.
built this guy. I mean, you know, there'd be stories if it was normal, or if it was a normal treatment, I would
And
say.
presumably not even an awareness of who might possibly live up there. Because like, why would Peg go up there if she knew it was like a mad scientist male?
Right.
You know, like what? I mean, I suppose they might buy makeup too. Like, I don't know, but I
Hey, she
wouldn't
was
think that
desperate.
would be like her demographic, really.
She was desperate. She was getting turned down by everybody. She had to make a sale, man. Those pyramid schemes.
And
Not
also like
the pyramid scheme. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
are there no other? Is this the only neighborhood in the city or the area? Like, because she
Well,
like
it's her patch.
Helen's
It's her
comment-
patch. The Avon
Well,
people
but
are
that's-
pretty tight.
It's her territory.
Yeah,
And,
you
like,
don't go in other people's territory.
I think that that's part of
Fair
it,
enough.
though, because in the TV broadcast, they say, like, how are you enjoying town? Like, this is clearly the local, their town has local television studios and broadcasts. So it's not even like this is from the neighboring city.
No.
It's This seems to be a self-contained little world here that has,
Sure.
you know, however many, you know, couple hundred or thousand people, and yet an infrastructure to have, you know, a TV studio and a mall and, you know, all these sorts of
Right.
things. And
Which,
it does
by the
kind of, is this a snow globe or like what's going on?
And that's one of the things that very much makes it not Burbank or virtually anywhere else in Southern California. You do not have that sort of localized mentality. Just a side note there.
Well, and that's why it feels more middle America to me,
Yeah,
like small town America, not so much suburb of a big city as
Right.
much as small town, any town kind of USA. So Devorah points out that Kim's granddaughter says that the mansion's haunted. So at least by the time of
Right.
of two generations on or whatever, there are stories. But maybe that's less true when Kim is a kid. It does seem to be more that it's just ignored. But maybe post Edward having come and gone, there's some urban myth among the kids of the haunted mansion on the hill. There's some sort of awareness of that.
Yeah. And yes, we will get to the parallel to Camazotz shortly, Arthur.
Mm-hmm.
I know. Yeah.
One thing, and this may be completely just out there, but one thing that made me laugh at the very end was I realized this tiny little girl in the bed, she looked like a disembodied head. You know? Just this head in this giant bed. I don't know if it says anything, but it just struck
Well,
me.
I have a picture of it later on. I certainly was tickled by just her smallness within the bed, like the kind of, you know, that sort of, what was that TV show where there was like, you know, a full grown woman, but the chair around her was enormous,
Oh,
and
Lily
they just made her
Tomlin.
look like
Lily
a little,
Tomlin
yeah, it made her look like a rag doll.
Laughing, I think, or something like that. She had her little kid. I can almost
Right.
remember her name. She had a name. Yeah. Well, that's touching.
But that kind of bedtime story quality
Yeah.
to it. Yeah.
And I'm not sure. I did read an article, and this was about the filmography, the cinematography, and the techniques that were used. And they did kind of cite this sort of Alice in Wonderland, where, you know, you go into the castle and everybody's tiny and minuscule compared to everything else, and then you come into Suburbia, and then the lower angles of the camera shots made everyone seem really to fill the space and fill the room.
Mm-hmm.
Not in every shot, but, you know, they were kind of comparing those things. And then you get back to the little girl and the giant bed, and, you know, it becomes another one of those sort of kind of pulling at our senses of.
Well, even in this shot here of the women standing around,
Right.
it's the way it's shot below them. They look like, is this a child's perspective? They look really tall and kind of menacing, sort of hanging over you there.
Right.
So yeah, I think that is there seems to be a switch between the two different, the Gothic and the suburban, you know, sort of what's your place in these worlds.
Sure. All right.
And I guess that's what the last thing on this sort of slide that I threw in was this quote from an essay by Russell Potter about, it's sort of about other things, but the one I pulled out here was the way that, the fact that we can't place this in any specific time or place, and yet you could have easily done the full fairy tale version where it's clearly once upon a time, where it's not set in, this is very clearly modern America. We can quibble over the specific decade, but it's not completely removed from us. And so his kind of point here is, by having Avon ladies and CD players and enough modern touches, when there are satirical elements, it doesn't allow us to say, well, that's happening in fairyland and it has no relation to me. It sort of indicts the audience a little bit, that if this is what Suburbia is, then maybe this is the values that are sort of attached to it.
All right.
So shall we see the comparison?
Here we go.
Of Suburbias.
We've been here before. We were just talking about this kind of creepy Cold War era suburban neighborhood where all the children and all the men sort of have their, you know, their activities are done in unison. Everything is very kind of idyllic, pastel colored, not at all creepy or, you know, conformity is clearly a value here.
But obviously, you know, the main differences in the Wrinkle in Time and Camazotz, the control is exuded from without, you know, and with the suburban Gothic themes, the control is from within. It's everyone conforming to an image or a desired image to be like, to be as assimilated as possible for their own comfort, for their own sense of belonging. And not out of any outward threat. At least that's usually what it is. There's the driving force from within, not the force from without kind of thing for everybody to conform. And, you know, you see that with how it's all laid out and the pastel themes and everyone's sort of behaving in the same way. But that shot right there, when the gals, all the women folk have been chatting like little, you know, chickens on the corner, and it's like nothing is going to stop them from gossiping except when their husbands are coming home all at the same time, driving into the neighborhood, entering their driveways, and then suddenly they disperse. Like that's the call. But what made me laugh though was remembering as a kid, when the street lights come on, that's when you're supposed to go home. So there is kind of, you know, there's something that kind of rings true to that, as much as we may not like it to ring true. But there is sort of, it did make me laugh. It did make me laugh. So.
Well, the one thing I'll say for this unnamed suburbia that the Boggs live in is that at least their houses are different colors.
Right.
So there are little touches of individuality that Camazotz does not have. And maybe that's the difference between an external sort of imprisonment of thought versus this internal one, which is highly, you know, conformative and everything, but it's still coming from individual human beings, and can they totally, they're not going to do everything exactly the same. And I think doing things, very subtle things, slightly different from each other maybe allows them to think of themselves as sort of individualistic. Like, I'll paint my house fluorescent green and that'll kind of, you know, shock the neighbors, like not kind of realizing it's only a slight difference. It's nothing that radical, but
most of the
go ahead.
Sorry, I was gonna say most of these colors would get you kicked out of any respectable
Oh, yeah.
homeowners association
Right,
today.
Right.
Yeah, sorry. Go ahead, Jen.
I was going to say, I think that, that we're all still talking about the visual representation of this neighborhood. Once we get into the individual characters and the people on the street, they do seem to conform to, similar values, goals, that kind of thing. But they are individuals. But one thing that did make me laugh was at the very beginning when Peg is doing her Avon calling. There's one shot of her walking up to a door, and the sidewalk that she's on, going through somebody's yard up to that, is very crooked. It's like it follows the house and then it jigs out, and she stays very precisely in the center of that little sidewalk all the way up to the door. So it's like this, even the little deviations and curves, you stay right on the sidewalk, you do exactly, right in the center. And it kind of, I didn't know if that was intentional or not, but that's kind of the message I got from that little, just that little moment. So
yeah. And Devore also says, is that one reason to maybe give a little admiration or credence to Esmeralda, who is certainly, for whatever else she is, she's nothing like anybody else in the neighborhood. And at least she's sort of bucking these sort of, very...
Esmeralda is the sex obsessed. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Wasn't Bewitched? Wasn't her mom's name Esmeralda?
Was it?
And the makeup was so, it looked like her. I think that was her name. Now I'm going to have to Google. Somebody Google it. I think that was her name because her makeup so looked like, maybe toned down a little bit, but with the cat eye and and that time frame.
Arthur says it was in Endora.
Endora. Okay. Oh, maybe it was somebody else, a cousin or something. It was the E. Give me that, please. But it did. She did evoke to me that image of her.
Oh, there is an Esmeralda. She's the maid.
Oh, okay. The maid.
I don't know what to do with that, but
I don't know what to do with either. But anyway, all right.
On the topic of individuality and conformity, though, too, I think the other thing that sort of strikes me is the idea that even within the suburban community, which has its certain amount of privilege and within a range is, probably everyone is around the same range of well off, but then you have Anthony and Michael Hall, I can't think of his character's name, his father, who's
Jim
seems to be very much more well off than everyone else, right? Like that's the implication, is that their family is better off. But seeing that one is a hardship because you have Peg out there kind of, trying to do her Avon lady thing and not being extremely successful at it, at least as far as we can see. But the idea that, and I don't mean to imply that like maybe she wants to do that. I don't actually know if they're doing that because they need the money or whatever. But just that idea that, also Mr. Boggs, whatever his name is, Alan Arkin there, is sort of signaling the virtue of, going out and getting, working for your own car to, Jim there. Thank you. Man, I'm doing terrible with character names tonight. But just that idea of like, there definitely is a, there's the individualism, but there's also the disparity between the incomes and the, they even blame, when they think Edward was going to steal, the items.
Right.
Peg's like, oh, it's because I said we would figure out a way to get the money, and there's maybe jealousy and envy there, and just kind of that idea of like, trying to go out and do your own thing. But of course, because Edward doesn't have the same values as everyone, he does it differently, and he doesn't quite know what it. And you know, the whole the ethical discussion around the table just reminds me of The Office's episode on ethics, where Oscar gets really mad and is like, no, it's not just like corporate policy of like what we should and shouldn't do. It's like an actual real world discussion about, you know, how should have, but you totally get that sense from Bill. Thank you, Arthur, or thank you, Deborah. You know, the father saying like, there's, you know, this is the thing that you should do. You know, here's the 4 choices, which is the correct one. And it's like, there's no opportunity for like nuance or, you know, circumstances or mitigating, you know, whatever. It's just, no, this is the right thing. And, you know, you should take the money to the police. There should never be any other time where, you know, you might spend it on your family or do something different than, you know, what the sort of prescribed societal answer to this ethical question is.
Right, and the lessons aren't based on teaching, like really working through ethics or morality. It's the kid is, you know, the little brother is like, you dope, everybody knows you're supposed to do this. So it's the right thing because everybody knows it. We don't need to get into why it's maybe better or worse than other decisions. Morality is based on this sort of social code of what, like, it's true because I tell you so. So like, just do it because I said so. And that's sort of as far as it goes.
Yeah, if we think back though, that's how Edward learned anything about engaging with people, was the inventor was reading to him out of an etiquette book.
Right.
And so, you know, you get the idea that here's something though that I think that we need to remember is, and don't forget your point, Curtis, because you're laughing, is Edward is not human. He really isn't. And people are expecting him, like the kid, don't you? Everybody knows that. He really genuinely, I mean, he has the capacity to love or to, you know, to admire Kim and have that sort of love thing, but fully human, maybe that's a discussion we need to have in a few minutes, but you know, he's not. So these things don't ring true for him automatically. So go ahead, Curtis. Sorry, you're going to laugh.
Well, and I love that they do contrast ethics with etiquette, right? Because etiquette is totally social, you know, conformity and, you know, convention. And I love too, because like the other thing is that, you know, the inventor, he gets bored of it. He's like, yeah, let's stop reading this. This is boring. So like, even if etiquette might have sort of, you know, subliminally or like through osmosis given Edward some kind of ethical structure, at least to say like, okay, here are the things you should do. I don't know why we're supposed to do these things, but at least these are the right things to do. Like the inventor just gets bored with trying to teach him that. It's just like, let's read poetry instead. Poetry's fun. Let's go read some poetry instead.
But interestingly, that conversation around the table, Edward stuck to his opinion. He didn't change his opinion, whether you would say, you know, it's right or not or whatever. He had his opinion that he stuck to. So he's not a complete blank slate that can be manipulated.
Right.
Yeah, and the opinion is that he would spend it on his family, right? Which he lost. He lost his family, like the only family he ever had. But also in contrast, the only example he's ever had was the inventor who was trying to help him, right? Who was doing what he did until literally his dying breath to try to help Edward. And so like, I think whatever we might say about the correctness of the ethical, you know, conundrum as put by Bill, you know, I think Edward certainly learned ethics, even if it was never like, you know, strict, this is what you should do and here's why you should do it, or everyone knows that you should do this, so you should do it. Edward certainly learns that, like, you know, to him it seems, you know, family is everything, that they're the ones who take care of you. And that seems true, I think, throughout. I almost said for the most part, I don't think he deviates at all, at least that I can think of in his actions.
I would even say, and and this carries us through to the very end, so maybe I'm overstepping, but everything about him is motivated and satisfied by familial or even romantic love, confirmation of that relationship, because he lives the rest of his perhaps eternal life. He keeps functioning, he keeps living, he doesn't age, but he's presumably happy and satisfied because he received affirmation of love from Kim. He did receive the familial and care from Peg. She was unconditional and loving, but for some reason that didn't trigger the same satisfaction. And once that was satisfied, it was full. And as you say, Curtis, he never deviated. All of his actions were driven by that sense. Never deviated.
And he confirms later, there's the one bit where the psychologist is sort of saying, well, he wasn't exposed to the world, like this neglected child, so he doesn't have the framework to tell right from wrong. Oh, he'll be fine. But when Kim asks, or she presumes that you didn't know it was Jim's house, like we tricked you into robbing Jim's house, and he says, I knew, you asked me to. So kind of again saying he knew it was wrong, so he can tell the difference. But that's not that the rightness or wrongness of it wasn't his framework. His framework was responding to the request of somebody he loves.
Right.
I don't know that I would say he knew that it was wrong. I think he has a completely different calculation of what is right and wrong.
Well, and maybe that's more what I was getting at. Sure.
Yeah, like it's wrong in terms of what everyone in the suburban community would think is wrong. But I don't think there's a quote that I'm trying to think of. I can't even remember where it is. I would butcher it if I tried it. But basically, the idea of what I might have done, what I did might have been ineffective or not the right thing from a sort of factual perspective. But that doesn't. I'm not convinced that it was the wrong thing to do. And I kind of get that idea that would be his answer if he were more wordy about it. That's my interpretation anyway.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. Arthur, is kind of calling Edward. He's identifying him as an innocent, and he's also relating it to sort of that sort of ethical instinct that you find in Perelandra, which is the Lewis book, right? Lewis C.S. Lewis wrote that. And so I guess his stake in the ground, his marker is all about that feeling of love, that family love, that kind of thing, and that's what he doesn't deviate from. But do we agree? I mean, is Edward depicted as an innocent? I mean, that's interesting. Are you a full character if you are an innocent? And what do you think?
I mean, I guess in the most literal sense, he qualifies in the way of lack of experience. Just maybe by virtue of his non-exposure to anything outside his creator and the house that he was brought up in and the plants that he was able to, the topiary that he created in the garden. That seems to have been the sum total of his experience for however long. So I guess if we take innocent in a very literal sense, I feel like certainly he qualifies there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
I shouldn't lose power, you all, but there's a huge, massive dust storm blowing in as we get during this time of year. So outside it looks like dirt. So I should be okay, but we usually don't lose power where we are. So just,
Okay.
We don't get
surprised.
Get dirt.
Yeah.
It's a bad one. All right, go ahead.
I have kind of sort of related question, and kind of between these two slides, you can go, or we can go back and forth.
Just because you mentioned the topiary, so I
well,
remember.
sure. I guess so far I feel like maybe we're not saying that this suburban neighborhood is quite as bad as Camazot's, but there seems to be the sense of, you know, Gothic castle, Edward the inventor are good, and kind of, you know, conformity and cookie cutter suburbia is more negative. I guess I want to poke at that a little bit. Is that as consistently true as it appears? Maybe it is. One of the things that I definitely noticed this time was we can use the phrase cookie cutter houses and neighborhoods, and yet what is in the inventor's mansion but a literal cookie cutter machine. And, you know, Edward himself is made out of this machinery and has a little cookie heart. In fact, there's an interesting cookie, you know, motif throughout this movie, because when you're talking about the ethical debates, there's that other conversation around the dinner table where the father says you can't buy things with cookies, and Jim's like, that's true, sir, you're right, like, good point. And like that, you know, again, this empty sort of morality, but like the cookies sort of being a link between the two worlds there. I don't know, like, is it as clean cut as Gothic and weird and eccentric good, normal sort of middle American suburbia bad, or is there some bleed over between the two?
Well, whether it's meant to be or not, I really had a hang up with the whole inventor thing, because number one, why are you messing around making this person, this human with feelings and emotions, and why are you even dabbling that in the first place, which is a very typical Gothic thing, you know, the crazy inventor of the Gothic castle, that is supposed to be the bad guy, right? And so I do question that. I do wonder about that. And then, like I was telling you earlier, why the heck give him these scissor hands and leave that to be the last thing you do for the poor guy? Where is that? And it was very interesting. An article we read was citing that if you've ever seen those diagrams of the human body, and they enlarge portions of it or shrink portions of the body to show how much sensory there is in different regions, and the hands are enormous. They're huge because they're like one of our main tactile sensing kinds of areas of actual nerve endings. So maybe it's too difficult. Maybe it was difficult for the inventor. It's the last thing he got to. I don't know. But still, to leave it to be the last thing that he gives him just seems cruel. It seems twisted. And that whole idea with the inventor creating something for his own pleasure, his own desire, thinking maybe he's doing something nice for this thing he's creating. But, you know, that's a hang up I'll have right from the start, right from the get-go.
Sure.
Like,
well, and that is,
where does that come from?
That comes from Frankenstein. I think that's the kind of ethical debate in that.
Just because you can,
in the book is, dude, like, what did you create me for? Just to decide, well, that was a mistake, and abandon me to the world. And I think even though the inventor seems like a sweet enough guy, I think you could certainly ask that same question of him.
Yeah, the hubris involved, you know. So.
Well, and I mean, okay, so a couple things. So first of all, like, if you could just get mail order hands anytime, like, why would you wait till the end? I agree. And it seems more complicated to create like a set of working scissor hands, you know, to place there than just, you know, I mean, he's already done like the legs and torso and arms and head and all of the other stuff. Like, are hands that much harder? I don't know. I mean, I've never done it, so I guess I can't really say. But that was the sort of thing I was thinking. I was thinking along the same line, Sharon. Why leave the hands to last, and why replace it with such a weird, complex, you know, potentially dangerous thing like scissor hands? And these are those are the types of questions, of course, that Kat always gets annoyed at me for asking, about Doctor Who and stuff, because it's like, you just have to take it.
Exactly. You have to suspend disbelief.
We don't, except in a few flashbacks, we don't get the inventor, so we can't actually know what his thought process is.
However, I would say that the hands are a big deal. So, sorry, I gotta shut that off. So, I should.
I know that sound.
Sorry, people.
I was afraid to look. I thought it was for me.
It was me forgetting to close it before we started. But I mean, the hands are so central. Let's face it, it is the thing that makes Edward and the whole movie what it is. So I mean, you do have to. I think it's okay to ask. Whereas, asking questions like, "What does Edward eat?" or "How does he go to the bathroom?" or any of those things. Clearly, I'm thinking
Oh,
those
yeah.
things
I didn't think of that second one.
I don't think. I mean, really.
The
But
delicate
I mean,
procedure.
all that leather, all the getup he's in, that seems like his actual skin. It actually contains him. It's all strapped in. I don't know that he could actually live without that skin. It's almost like a Dune still suit or something. So I honestly don't think, and because because in this at the frame tale at the end of the story, it shows him still in his youthful visage. He hasn't aged, so I'm thinking that he is not he does not have the full complete body functions like a human would. So we can kind of suspend those kinds of questions about what he eats and how he, does his respirates and all those things. But
although I want to say I think he eats cookies, but
well, yeah, they have the mechanism.
But the real answer is I don't think he has to eat. It seems to me that that's not a thing that is necessary for him.
Right. So I mean, those kinds of factual things we can kind of remove from needing to tick the box. But the hands, that it's important. And so to me, it just really makes me question the inventor. And I think that's okay to do. I think I think that not knowing which castle good, neighborhood bad, castle bad, neighborhood good. I don't think we're supposed to choose one or the other. I think that they are in sort of edging each other out. They're creating some dynamic feelings there that kind of takes it out of your standard tropes, your standard cookie cutter kind of tropes. Which makes it kind of special, makes it interesting.
Well, and you'll notice, to highlight the importance of hands, that in front of the mansion there, it's a hand, is the central topiary kind of in the little stone fountain there.
And I mean, the other thing that I would say about that is, what about the failed experiments? Because Wynona Ryder finds a random scissor hand just lying there. What does that imply about maybe
it did show the little prototype figures and sort of little automaton type of guys.
Yeah, right, when his sort of journal is flipping the pages. Yeah.
Oh, one thing I have to ask you. In the castle, I think it was during the cookie cutter scene, those big round vat kind of things with all the bands on it and stuff like that. I totally it was a flash to Violet Beauregard blown up as a blueberry in Willy Wonka. I could not get that image out of my head. I don't know if that was intentional or not, but boy, that was her belt, in the one with Gene Wilder and everything. Totally cracked me up. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, we know that's an important text for Tim Burton, right? Certainly later in his career, but probably my guess would be that those references are there earlier too. And the idea of, again, small little town with this weird eccentric on the hill who has factories making who knows what. So it's a similar sort of setup between the two.
Sorry, Curtis, I interrupted you with my violet blueberry imagery. What were you going to say? I'm sorry.
I don't. So, well, on the topic of hands, at Arthur's suggesting other names for the character in the movie, Edward Meat Hands, Finger Hands, Normal Hands. Edward Stump Hands. Like, like did he need something there? Like, so I guess yes, he needed hands of some kind, but like the point is like, why not just give him normal hands? I think the other piece of the conversation though is that like, yes, obviously these are tricky to use and dangerous to use at times. You see the cuts all over his face, and obviously he unintentionally hurts the people he loves, and so that's not good. But also he creates very beautiful things, and he does have a certain amount of dexterity with the hands, given all of the artwork that he is able to make, and cutting hair and not like hurting people, while doing it. So that's the flip side of it, right? Like these are very awkward and dangerous tools, but can also be used to make very beautiful things. And that, I think, is part of the dichotomy of the Gothic horror and the, beautiful, or at least beautiful looking Suburbia. And there in that picture there, even of the castle, mansion, whatever we want to call it, before it gets all run down. Like, presumably he does a lot of, certainly we know he's doing the bushes there, right? Like, and so is this like, his dad, inventor? Whatever we call him, is he like out there doing, planting the flowers like alongside while Edward's, carving the bushes? Like, maybe they did Saturday gardening together or something.
Well, and there's the link between the two of them as creators. Seems to be a trait passed on, from father to son, is to make things.
Didn't the psychologist say he's a highly imaginative son or something like that?
Right. And in the inventor's defense, I feel like the instinct with these sort of, whether it's the Tin Man or whatever, it's usually like the metal man who lacks a heart, whereas the inventor leads with the heart. Like it's the cookie, and over the machine that gives him the idea. So it's kind of like I'd rather he leave the hands for last than leave the heart for last. In a sense, like I don't know. Symbolically, the idea to me is that first he gave him life and a personality, and then he saved the what he thought of as the more sort of menial things for the end, not intending to have his work left unfinished, and maybe not realizing the difficulty he'd leave him in if he didn't finish.
Yeah, can you imagine Edward Scissorhands, no heart, coming down, ravaging the neighborhood, killing everything in sight?
Right.
Because he has no heart. Now, here, correct me if I'm wrong. The lighting, in where I was watching the film again, just recently in my living room, when the inventor is reading to him out of first the etiquette book and then the poetry, and he's just sitting there. Are his legs like not attached yet? He's just sort of a torso and a head, and the legs are like sideways because they're not even done yet.
Right. So, he's like from here up. That's all there is, and he's sort of sitting on a table.
All right. So we have the idea then the inventor was investing in his emotional development as much as he was in the physical development of him. Okay. Right. I still think, yeah. But anyway.
Yeah.
I have to suspend. But I think it does speak to something that I had wanted to talk about, and it may come up later in the slide. And I think that Arthur might have commented something, if we look at this, we're talking about Gothic because that's most obvious what it is. But those of us who have been indoctrinated so heavily with Mythgard and Signum, we always think fairy and, the other, and going through doorways and gateways, eating the food of the other place, all those kinds of things. And there's very much doorways and gateways and portals in this. normally the creepy, scary, macabre thing is fairy. That's the other. But can we also then look at it the other way and see that the suburbia for Edward is actually fairy? He's being lured in by the queen, Peg, taken in, taken out of his normal world and brought into the alternative fairy. So it kind of works both ways again, which makes this film interesting.
Yeah, I think that's a fabulous reading of this as,
Right.
Edward as Tam Lin.
Yeah.
He's the one he's from his world, which is normal to him and makes sense and is what he knows. He's drawn into this perilous realm by this kind of queen of this other realm, like you said. He's given food and drink, which you should never ever
Right.
accept when it's offered to you. And it's ambrosia, of course, the food of the gods. It's the like fairy food.
Yeah.
He falls in love with this beautiful princess, and then his life and safety are threatened by this horde of monsters, and then he goes back again.
Right, and he's almost seduced by one of the creatures, should we say?
Right, by this sort of temptress.
Incubus.
Yeah, and
right?
then
Succubus, not incubus, succubus.
Right, and then he went there, and he goes back again. I really like that reading. I think that's really fun.
Right.
Good job, Sharon. Write that paper. I don't know. Anything else about, I feel like it's somewhat self-explanatory once you point it out.
Right.
You can kind of see all the little parallels and stuff. Is there any other sort of inverted fairy elements?
Well, I think that the people who come after him are only satisfied when they think that he's dead. He's not dead, but they think that he's dead, and they have a token, his hand, of that death, and they're immediately satisfied. Again, it's this suspending your disbelief. How can that be enough? There's no investigation. They don't seem to care one bit for the dead kid on the ground.
No.
No. Maybe they all knew he was a bad seed or whatever. But again, there's that very otherworldly sense about how they have aesthetics and what they value, and so yeah.
Right. Yeah, it just makes me think of the end of Beauty and the Beast. In general, certainly this movie evokes that, but the Disney version specifically, like Jim is very much, he's the Gaston figure. And yeah, he can whip up the crowd into a mob frenzy, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he's beloved by his community.
Right.
And nobody really mourns him when he goes. There's a sense that he's maybe a monster to them as well, in a way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Edward is left like those who do survive their trip to fairy. They're left with a longing that's never satisfied, that they live with, that they dream of, that forever. He lives and dreams with his dreams of his memory of Kim, and tries to recapture that on the other side of the wall as best he can.
Recapture it through his artwork.
Yeah.
It's very Tolkien-esque, making beautiful things inspired by this other realm which you're sort of not allowed access to.
Right. And it's the whole, and I think you may have already said this, but the idea that crossing that line, it's not going to go well. There's no scenario in which it will go well. It's going to go bad because you don't belong there. So, all right. Also, one thing that's interesting is that Edward doesn't speak much. I think I've read a few articles about the character, and I think there's only like 100 160 words that he says through the whole movie.
Right,
And,
words.
and
Yeah.
and in some ways, that's another element of fairy is there's communication breakdown. It's hard. There's almost a language or not knowing the precise form and etiquette, but also the language of the realm that you're in. So there's kind of that too. I was thinking might be another element. So
Well, and that's another reason I think Johnny Depp was suited for this, evoking the kind of silent era. There's another movie that he did called Benny and June, where it's a character that just lives his life like Charlie Chaplin. So I think that as an influence, the idea that it's mostly a silent performance. There's very few actual lines that he has. So you want someone who can do the physical acting without the benefit of a lot of dialogue.
Right. And it's very simple for Edward going into this other world to misstep, to not do something right, as we see in typical fairy stories. Going into fairy, it's very simple. It's very easy to break a law, break a rule, take a misstep, and not even realize it. So there's that as well.
Mm-hmm. Did we skip over a slide or two on the way there?
Just because we were talking about fairy, I went to that.
Sure.
Which, I mean, there's fairy tale stuff on here too, but this is, I think, more
there's
general.
The little girl in the giant bed.
Oh, yeah.
Which is somebody else pointed out that, again, with the timelessness. So if we assume, based on like the CD players, that the movie's set in the 80s or 90s, then this would be like the far future, because she's old now. And yet we're in some sort of Victorian fairy tale here, where she like has her little bun and her knitting, and the child in this enormous ornate bed. Again, it's like we've looped back around into this is not futurism we're evoking in any sense here.
No, there's almost a stasis to it, which is interesting. So, like, almost implying that the society doesn't age in the same way that Edward doesn't age.
Yeah.
There might be more that could be said about that. I don't know.
Well, that could be another of the fairy tropes of time not being the same in one place to another,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I think in this case it's that neither time really changes.
Right.
I mean, the people get older and die and whatever, but like the society itself seems to, going by the very limited view that we have of, the wallpaper and bed and stuff. And I think we get like one shot where we can kind of see out the window with like the snow.
And she moves across the room with the fireplace.
Yeah. But like there's nothing there to hint that like it's a different decade even, other than her age itself.
Well, and with the kind of mid-century modern architecture and design, that feels more kind of the retrofuturism of Kim's youth feels more contemporary and futuristic than even this sort of little Edwardian bedroom. Speaking of the snow, I did want to throw in a note here about these just so stories. Another term, the pourquoi, the origin myth. Why? How did we get something? And I like the idea of this is, just like, Rudyard Kipling will write about how did the leopard get his spots? It's where does snow come from? This is sort of a little nature myth about how the nature of snow. And again, it's like, okay, is it significant because this is set in Florida or California where snow doesn't happen? Or is this, the origin of snow across the world? Maybe there was no snow anywhere. just like there was supposed to not be rain before the flood, and then after the flood there was rain. Now it's sort of like there was no snow, and then Edward came, and now we have snow.
Mm-hmm.
So it's another kind of genre that they're playing with here.
Yeah. Well, it's also, I would say it is a genre, but it also is it's a way to connect, or if you think about it, if there wasn't snow, we would not know what Edward was up to. Kim would not know what Edward was up to. She wouldn't know that he's still there. He would disappear effectively. But because the snow returns, she knows that he's still there. So it does touch on the, like you say, the origin story, the pourquoi stories, and it is a vehicle in that respect. But it does allow for Kim to know that he is still alive, that he is still there. She still has a connection with him, and she knows that when he is creating his ice sculptures, he is most likely remembering her and creating a sculpture of her. So that's a tie-in. I think that's maybe a mechanism for the snow, and it gives her a chance to tell the story.
Right. There's narrative reasons for it.
Yeah.
It's and I think that's a really lovely kind of dovetail moment at the end where you realize the connection between the snow and its very personal meaning to the characters, and that you kind of have forgotten by the end that that's the original question of the movie is, Grandma, where does snow come from? And so when you kind of return to that at the end, kind of realizing this has all been an explanation, not just for where it comes from, but what it means and its sort of symbolic and emotional significance is kind of a nice, it's a very satisfying kind of circle there.
Right.
Sure. And we get confirmation as the viewers that Edward actually is up there doing the snow. But there's no, I mean, I'm sure, Wynona Ryder believes that, that's where the snow is coming from. And, a child in bed listening to a story, she has no idea if her grandmother's making this story up or not. And, will she continue to believe it? It doesn't matter if she does, I don't know. But like, I kind of wonder, like, if we had never got that like last shot of Edward there at the hole in the roof, with the ice sculpture, like, would we believe that this story like actually happened to her, or would this just be a made up story, by a grandmother telling her grandkid?
I do think there could be that could be a question, but it was set, at least a portion of the time frame was set at Christmas. Barely wearing a jacket. People are out in the middle of the night, barely wearing clothes. They clearly stated it does not snow here.
Right.
So the fact that there is snow right there, yes, that's part of Kim, the grandmother's story to the little girl, saying, "Oh, it never snowed here until Edward came along, and now when it snows, we know he's up there." But
that's the frame of the story.
But we don't just have her word for it. We have the depiction of that area. It's Christmas, middle of, late December. The dad's up on the roof in shirt sleeves, throwing his roll of fake snow down the front. So I'm going to say that I think without it, we might question whether it is, but I don't. I think there's enough there to say no, it doesn't snow here. It's been communicated to us that this area does not get snow, therefore it's not a tall tale to explain why there's snow. That's my take. That's what I would take from that.
Except that that's all done in the context of a frame. And again, we get the one last moment that shows us the frame is telling a true story. But outside of that, like, to the girl doesn't know if her grandmother that. So I'm just trying to say, like,
the final scenario of Edward in the castle with snow coming out the roof is the only thing that exists outside the frame, other than the grandmother and the granddaughter. So so without that, you could just do it as this is a bedtime story.
Yeah.
And that seems to be the one outside indication that that it has primary truth outside of the tale that she's telling.
Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe that doesn't matter. I was just.
And we are not.
It's interesting. It's an interesting decision to give that confirmation to the viewer.
And we're not supposed to question where he's getting his big old blocks of ice.
No.
Another invention of
father,
a perpetual ice making machine.
Yeah, he set up automated deliveries before he died. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Every year he gets big trucks full of ice blocks. Yeah.
Amazon.
So some other another one I had up here was Struwwelpeter, which is one of my favorite creepy German stories.
They got weird.
Famous from The Office. This is what Dwight reads to the kids on Bringing Your Daughter to Work Day. And the Doctor reads it too. There's in the most recent series of Doctor Who, when they're in the Regency. It's actually anachronistic because they're in a time period where he has a book that shouldn't have been written yet, but to the little Regency street urchins, he reads Struwwelpeter. And it's all cautionary tales about how, well, there's Struwwelpeter here who looks Edward Scissorhands like with his, it's kind of about what a slovenly, unkempt child he is with his bushy hair and uncut fingernails. But then there's also a scissor man within those stories who will come and cut your thumb off if you suck it.
Yeah.
So all this kind of scary scissor imagery to kind of make sure that kids are paying attention. Other than the imagery, I'm not sure what to connect it to. Like, is there any sense of a cautionary tale in this story? Like, is this a story to warn kids of anything? Or is that completely outside?
So. I didn't get that sense at all. You'd have to convince me that it's a cautionary tale, other than, the usual, the world will stomp on delicate, sensitive people. It's not, but that's not really a cautionary tale.
Right. Or maybe more cautionary for the grown-ups, like what kind of ethical messages are you projecting? It's more about, I don't think we're supposed to be critical of Edward, certainly.
No. Well, one thing I do, go ahead. Sorry, Curtis, you go ahead, because I was going to take us off somewhere else. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, from Edward's perspective, I suppose it could be looked at as a cautionary tale.
Right.
But, like, he's not the one to whom the tale is being told. So I don't think that makes, like, it's from sort of the inverted fairy tale perspective, I guess, that could work. But the story is being told to the granddaughter. And what's the story that's being told to her is that there's a very beautiful, if not, if somewhat odd-looking, person who made this wonderful thing, snow. And I guess it's almost the opposite of a cautionary tale. It's an encouraging tale. It's like you could imagine this granddaughter growing up and being like, wow, there's this really cool, metaphorically and literally cool person up there playing with ice that, maybe I should go look up when I'm older and can make the journey up the hill, kind of thing. Like, I almost get the sense that there's a charge or a challenge being, like, set out to the granddaughter, not explicitly, certainly, but kind of giving her this idea of, like, we had this visitor once a long time ago, and the people weren't ready for him, but he's still up there. And if you go looking for him, maybe you could experience something that most people don't get to experience. And
Right.
there's,
Right.
there's, that's, I mean, I hadn't thought of that until the question was asked, is this a cautionary tale? But I almost feel like whatever the opposite adjective of cautionary is, I feel
Right.
like,
And explicitly, the scissor man is
Right.
scary, whereas Edward, apart from maybe the initial shock of his appearance, isn't. He is that gentle figure, like you said.
And
There's also that's a good Peter Pan
I was
connection.
just gonna say,
mm.
little Peter Pan right there.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
and an interesting thing, I mean, because that's like there's a lineage to that now too with Peg, because Peg was the adventurous one who went outside of her little community and went up the hill and didn't run away screaming when she saw this oddity of nature. Like, she said, "Oh, why are you hiding?" and encouraged him to come out. And I mean, maybe there was a little potential for financial incentive if she could sell him something, but was like very kind to him and gave him astringent for his cuts, and took care of him and you know tried to like make him conform and blend, to get the right consistency. And that didn't work. Like, he didn't conform. And I mean, like, he shouldn't have, so that's fine, but like it also caused problems. And I think there's very much, now you have, it's not just so we don't know. So we skip a generation, right? Because we get Peg and Kim and the granddaughter. We don't know, um, Kim's child. If what happens there, if he or she had any experiences with Edward Scissorhands. But you have this idea of like, now you have like three generations. They're not successive generations, but three generations who potentially now can go up the hill and kind of experience these things. And I think well, perhaps better than I do, Kat, and Sharon, you may too. Like, is that a thing too? Like the sort of generational aspect to experiencing fairy. And I mean, you've got Bilbo and Frodo who both kind of go there and back again and kind of have their adventures. And I'm sure there's other stories, right, of the sort of generational aspect to the adventures that could be had in fairy.
Right.
Yeah, and I mean, Peter Pan is the one
Right.
that certainly leapt to my mind, of especially in that moment of I'm too old now.
Yes.
I've forgotten how to fly.
Ever so much older than 30.
Yeah, but right,
yeah.
exactly. But he's still out there, and that suggestion that does get passed on from generation to generation.
And to touch again on another Tolkien tale is the Smith of Wootton Major, where
Yes.
the children are somebody is chosen.
Yeah. That's probably a better connection.
Yeah. So, but I do want to say, and this might have been where I've been wanting to take the conversation to some of the characterization. I loved Peg. I loved her because while perhaps, I mean, her intentions were so genuine, and even though she did try to blend and hide the scars, it I think her motivation was always with him in mind, with Edward in mind, and she was just so consistently. It would have been easy, I think, to depict everyone in Suburbia with their own little, instances of their character flaws, or criticalness or any of those things. But Peg and even Bill, they really cared about Edward, and they kept that consistent all the way through. And even at the end, she's kind of talking to herself, saying, "Oh, maybe I shouldn't have brought him down here." And she never blames him. She doesn't say, "Why did I ever bring you here? You've ruined our lives." Never. She's just the most innocently sweet, caring figure, and it was really nice to see that. I think I liked her. I preferred her virtue over Kim's. You know, Kim was with the, oh, yeah, he was with the creep. Why didn't she know who she was with? And she went along with the whole robbery scheme. She was there. She didn't say no and then go try to warn Edward and somehow have it not work where she couldn't warn him. You know, there was nothing like that. She was in on it. She was invested in that whole thing. She tried to stand up to Jim, but really like failed and kept going along with it. So for my part, I really, really, you know, I could do without Kim. I was totally, I'm flying the peg flag. I love her.
Team Peg.
Yeah, Team Peg. And that was the impression I remember having when the very first time I saw it as a younger person. So it isn't necessarily, because I'm like, am I thinking that because I'm the mom now? You know,
right.
But even
the mom's the hero of the story. Yeah.
But I think even at the time, I was really taken with just her genuine sweetness, and that's how they wrote her, and that's how Diane Weiss played her beautifully, perfectly. And I really loved that she was that way to the end, even to the point where she knew when to give up. She knew when to let go. So, love her.
Yeah, and Diane Weiss' performance is just
amazing,
absolutely fantastic.
Because it was never saccharine. I mean, it's so easy to turn it saccharine and fake and not. I mean, but it just for me, that really came from the heart, and she really sold it. She really did.
Right, and I forget, one of the articles or reviews that I was looking at said it you know, kind of started by quoting the Avon calling and then sort of twisted that into Avon is her calling. Like this is her vocation.
Yeah.
She believes in it and she does good with it and does everything she can to use it for good. And
even like to the point where even to the point where like she gets so excited about speaking to the owner of the company. And like that's one of her goals, right? Like that's like a bucket list thing. Like
right. But it's not even, I've kind of forgot. You think of it as, oh, I have an excuse to talk to the head of the company. But what does she talk to them about? It's how to help Edward. It's not even, it helps her career, but her career is not even the goal. It's not like, oh, I have an excuse to talk to them so that now I can advance myself. Maybe that happens down the line and that's, you know, an added benefit of this meeting. But but the purpose of her call to the head of the company is share your genius with me so that I can help this person. So even in that, she's still sort of giving.
Yeah. And she knows that you know, they come in and they when Edward shows up and they all say barbecue at 5, and she could say no. She could you know, she's not stupid. She knows what's going on, but she just go ahead and does it. And it's not. I don't get the sense. That's the other thing where I think she really played it well. I mean, in some ways, she bends, but she doesn't give in. She doesn't get run over or walked over insofar as she can. She's still verbal. She's you know, she throws her body in between Edward and as much as she can and protects him and so. And she's making excuses. He's just this, he's just that, it's just fine. No, it's just a little scratch. It's not a big. And so she's always there in his corner, and that never deviates. And so
I love that moment too when she's selling to her neighbor and the neighbor's like, Peg, you know I'm never gonna buy anything, and she's like, I know, bye. Like just like the non-resentment of her community, even though like you said, you know that she's smart enough to see their flaws. It's not like she's brainwashed and thinks everything is perfect and rosy. She sees, you can see that she has frustrations, but she's not bitter about anything. Yeah.
Team Peg. Woohoo.
Team,
All right.
Team Peg.
Yeah.
Devorah had a kind of jumping off the issue of Edward's appearance and his
Sorry, can I just say
scarring
one
and
thing
everything.
about
Oh yeah.
Peg before we move on?
Oh, of course.
Because
Yeah.
when this movie came out, I was just going into high school, so of course, Wynona Ryder certainly caught my eye. But I didn't remember anything about the parents or, kind of the other story. I mean, for me, it was all like, oh yes, it's this story in which Wynona Ryder and Johnny Depp fall in love or whatever. Like that was like all I remembered about it
How
until
it
I
was
rewatched
marketed.
it.
That was
And
how it was marketed. So
yeah, I mean that was how it was marketed, and I think given the sort of way it ends and stuff, I mean I think that's what we're prompted to remember as well. But I had no memory of the fact that like for the first 35 minutes of the film, like Wynona Ryder's not even in it. It is all Peg and Edward, getting to know each other and kind of the much slower introduction into the family and the community than I remembered. And I think that's significant. I mean, I think that supports your point, Sharon, of that Peg is, I mean, yes, her role maybe becomes less focused on as the movie goes forward, but she obviously is a very significant part of the movie. So I think just wanted to agree with you there and just kind of note that's like I was kind of surprised by that fact in rewatching it the first time after, oh gosh, more than 20 years probably since I've seen it. So yeah.
Cat. Yeah, she is the kind of moral center of this movie, I think. So kind of related to Edward's sort of disfigurement or disabilities, Devorah asks, what's the significance do we think of so many people telling him that they have a doctor friend? Everybody has a doctor friend that they want to introduce them. Which he doesn't necessarily seem completely opposed to. I don't know that anybody ever really sits down and asks him, what would you like, Edward? Everybody kind of, it gives the impression, but he does say, like, I'd like to meet him.
I would like to meet him.
So. In that one moment anyway. Yeah. One thing I noticed this time watching was when they're at the barbecue and one of the dads who has a war wound or a prosthetic limb of some kind says, like, don't ever let anybody call you a cripple or do these things. And he's the one who says that to Kim or whoever's out looking for Edward. He's the one kind of in the garage saying, "Where's that freak, that cripple?" And sort of throwing that term. I'm not sure I know what to do with that fact other than that, I guess the fickleness of the community who turn on him so sort of quickly. And
I think it was an indicator that even someone who should have been able to empathize with him, he turned as well. There was really no hope in that community for him.
As far as, I mean, so the offers, I think they're kindly, offered. Like, I don't think anyone's like saying, oh, let me, tell you about a doctor who can fix you or whatever. I don't think that's necessarily done out of a, malicious intent or anything. But I think it goes back to that desire of the sort of pressure of conformity, of you're different than everyone else. And I mean, that's in the TV station, that's even the, implication of the question of like, well, if you did that, that would mean you're the same as everyone else. And you get the sense that like Edward kind of feels that pressure too, of like, yeah, that might be good if I were like everyone else.
And clearly it touches on, what we were talking about with Peg, blend. But what was interesting about the television station interview was they had just talked about his topiary skills, his hair skills, all of these skills he has, which he might lose if he conforms, if he becomes normal, if he is fixed, if he's corrected. And so that was kind of I think an obvious messagey kind of thing, about being normal and losing what makes you special and different and unique, and being okay with that and desiring that people desire to give up features and skills that they have for the sake of normalcy.
Mm-hmm. Right. And that goes,
it's okay, or it's good, it's desirable.
Right. And that goes back to your original question of why Scissorhands. And, I think that his disability, or, the thing that makes him other, being linked to the thing that makes him a creator and a genius. And that you don't have one without the other.
Mm-hmm.
But why would he want to risk losing that because he can't touch the girl he wants to hold? And maybe in his mind, I'd like to meet that doctor because maybe the sacrifice of the hairdressing salon is worth the ability to have this family that right now he's in danger of injuring every time he tries to get close. So there's something to gain for him too.
That's really, really poignant that's what he values so much, that he would give up what makes him unique and special, and at this point is the only skill that he has. That's the only skill that he has are the chippy chop chop stuff. He would give that up for that. So in a way, it's also a story of what would you sacrifice for something that you valued so much.
So we're creeping up here on 10:30 Eastern time anyway. Sharon's got a few more hours. But any other thought? And what about any of these other secondary characters that we haven't talked a lot about? I don't know. There is a lot to talk about.
Apparently, Tim Burton said this in the commentary, and I didn't go and look up his reasoning. And partly that was deliberately because I kind of don't know what he means by this and wanted to throw it to the group to see if we could figure out maybe what he means by this. That he finds Bill, the dad, the scariest character in the movie. Did that strike anybody else? And if so, why? The only thing I can think of is the kind of relentless normality of him, because even some of these other housewives are eccentric in their own way. If it's, Joyce, this kind of cougar, mom down the street, or, Esmeralda, there's quirk within them. Whereas I feel like maybe you could make an argument for Bill as the most kind of, middle of the road. Is there anything to distinguish him from, what is thought of as this perfectly mundane suburban idyll? But I wouldn't have necessarily thought of him as scary, so I didn't know if that struck anybody else.
I do find that rather odd. If I had to guess, the one thing that Bill does do at every turn, which is the impulse of many parents, some people do this, this is just how they're wired, is to make a teaching moment out of everything. And never just letting something be. And Tim Burton strikes me as the kind of person for whom that would be torture, a nightmare. That's the only relationship I have with my father, my friend, my coworker, my boss, my whatever, my mom, whatever, is every turn I make, everything I do, everything I say becomes a teaching moment. And so maybe that's what terrifies him or turns him off. One thing I did read though, or because I was going to view the movie with the commentary, but I decided not to because somebody commented that when the anniversary edition came out with commentary, somebody said, "Oh, that was the most disappointing thing in all the world. Tim Burton can't talk in a commentary. He has nothing useful to say. He just kind of most of the time doesn't say anything, and what he does say, it might be an inside joke or his own little thought, but it's not that he's not commentary rich. You know how some commentaries they're juicy, they're so interesting. So I didn't even bother. So anyway, but back to Bill, why he's scary.
I mean, the scariest that I don't know. I mean, I don't know that I have anything useful to add to that.
Deborah suggests.
Go ahead.
She was just saying that he shrugs off Jim. He seems that he's on the roof. He should be able to hear this sort of violent, aggressive moment that's happening and just sort of, doesn't intervene or seem concerned at all. And so, yeah, I mean, he has a kind of like, just everything's just sort of fine. He just kind of floats through. Like, you don't get a real sense of conviction in the same way that you do with Peg, who clearly feels strongly about things and, has passion. I'm not sure that he sort of matches her in that. So maybe that's part of it. I don't know.
And Deborah also mentions that she enjoyed the commentary. So maybe I'm missing something. Maybe I'll have to go back and try. Thank you, Deborah, for your vote of confidence on that.
Your mileage may vary.
Right.
Well, and so we should just kind of maybe wrap up with mentioning sort of impact and legacy, I guess, for lack of a better term. I don't mean that as a slight or anything. I just obviously, yes, we see the variety of other strange roles here that
right. No fewer than 6 other Tim Burton, Johnny Depp collaborations about pale men with dark hair and creepy shadows under their eyes who are kind of eccentric and inhabit a strange world. So is this sort of a case of diminishing returns? She asks as not a leading question at all. That's a genuine, open-ended question.
I've not seen most of these, so I can't answer that.
Oh.
Well, I've seen most of them. There's a couple I haven't. Like I said, Ed Wood down there in the bottom left, I think is maybe a candidate for future movie club years. Maybe we need a break from this formula, but for a couple cycles. But for anybody that doesn't know, it's about Edward D. Wood Jr., who has been deemed the worst director who ever lived by a few different critic polls. He was a real guy who made terrible, terrible movies in the 50s.
Not even B. Let's call him D.
Like Z movies. Plan 9 from Outer Space being famously the worst movie ever made. So I already have a Seinfeld reference here. My other Seinfeld reference is in the Chinese restaurant episode where they don't get to the movies. They're going to see Plan 9 from Outer Space, which, Seinfeld wants to see because it's the worst movie ever made and it's going to be great. And so Ed Wood is, for me, another contender of the best among these collaborations. But he's a very eccentric character. Yeah.
Can you just maybe go like clockwise and say what all the movies are that are depicted here? Because maybe not everyone even recognizes what they are.
So top left is Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, right? The remake. You know, Johnny Depp is Willy Wonka there. And then Ed Wood is below him with his film crew. To the right of that is Corpse Bride, which was an animated stop motion, sort of in the vein of A Nightmare Before Christmas. And then to the right of that is Sleepy Hollow. Ichabod Crane is the character. And then above him is Sweeney Todd, which is a Stephen Sondheim musical. And then to the left of that, this is one I haven't seen, is Dark Shadows, which was an old vampire TV show, like a soap opera in the 60s or 70s, I think. And so they did a movie version of that, which is one of the ones I haven't seen, so I can't comment too much on it. Arthur mentions Glenn or Glenda, which was one of Ed Wood's movies. Ed Wood was a transvestite as well. So in addition to making really bizarre sci-fi and horror movies about aliens and monsters and, you know, plans from outer space to take over the world, he also made a movie called Glenn or Glenda about a transvestite. So yeah, Ed Wood is wonderful. And so yeah, I mean, I don't know if anybody has any other favorites from that group. I mean, Ed Wood's clearly mine. I remember Sleepy Hollow coming out when I was still fairly young and enjoying that at the time. It's been a while since I've seen it.
I enjoy it. I will rewatch it every once in a while, maybe around Halloween. I don't find it repulsive. I find it entertaining. I really do. I do find it entertaining.
I lied earlier when I said I hadn't seen most of these. I've actually not seen any of them.
Oh, really?
I realized as you were running through them, I'm like, yeah, no, I haven't seen.
So you're not tired of the old Depp Burton collaborations yet?
I guess not.
Most people are. Yeah. Well,
so the other thing that's not on here is there's actually a comic book, not adaptation, but a continuation of the Edward Scissorhands story. So and it's like years later. It's not like immediate continuation or something. But it's
the granddaughter.
No, I don't know. I've not read it, but I think it's still Kim, or maybe it's the daughter. Maybe that's the missing generation that we don't see in the movie. I don't know for sure.
Missing link.
Maybe the granddaughter is his daughter. maybe Kim's daughter got together.
You have reproductive organs before hands.
You can't take his suit off.
No, I know. Anyway,
as far as we know.
As far as we know.
And then also maybe the weirdest out of all of this is that there was a species of extinct lobster type creature that was named after Johnny Depp specifically because of this role. So there's a drawing of it. I mean, they found skeletons of it. Obviously, it's been extinct for some time, so we don't know what it actually looked like, I guess, except, based on the skeleton. But just kind of a fun addition there.
We're getting some love for Corpse Bride in the comments, so that's one to check out.
I'm not opposed to seeing any of them. I just realized as you were naming them, I'm like, I've not actually seen any of these.
I don't think I've seen Corpse Bride either, actually.
The only version of Sweeney Todd I've ever seen is the one portrayed by Andy in The Office.
Devore also points out the connection. Sweeney calls the razor an extension of his hand, so it's another character with scissors for hands, but decidedly less gentle than Edward, for sure. Completely different character.
Not quite so pure of heart.
Not quite so pure.
I think we need to not leave without mentioning really quickly that the music by Danny Elfman was extremely influential and has been regurgitated and reused in many forms because it's so evocative. It really is. And I think he started taking over writing commercial jingles and scoring commercials because people were doing it instead of him, and he wanted to do it right. So, but it is the music is very evocative. You'll hear it all over the place, it's like any other film. It's not the same movie if you don't have the music. The music is another character, and it really, really shapes any kind of film that you experience. So it's worth mentioning.
And beyond their collaborations, their multiple collaborations, I think Elfman and Burton are similar in that they're so distinct that they're very easy to parody.
Exactly.
And they are very easy to turn into cliches. And I think, the arguments are certainly made that they've become self-parodies after a while. And maybe their voices are so specific and so distinct that it can become a bit sort of repetitive if you're not sort of careful. But that was funny to read that Elfman was like, I can rip myself off. Why am I letting other people rip me off? I can do this, and started scoring commercials himself because they were all just using Edward Scissorhands music.
Yeah.
Which is kind of funny.
Yeah. Very influential too, though.
Yes, for sure. And that doesn't diminish. In fact, that only increases the impact of the original thing to say that people keep going back and referencing to it and ripping it off. Although, to go back to the kind of finish on the final slide again, The Shape of Water is really the only thing I could even think of to compare this movie to in terms of story and genre. Just as, Gothic fairy tale romance isn't a genre where I could think of a lot of other examples. And that's one recent one that sort of leaps to mind. But I feel like as much as you can sort of parody Edward Scissorhands, not a lot of other people have done things very much like it, other than Tim Burton, But
and it's really Sleepy Hollow. Sleepy Hollow is a Gothic romance fairy tale, essentially.
Sure. Right. So he kind of hit on a format that he liked. But are there any other filmmakers that really kind of did the Burton-esque style? I don't think many of them have.
Yeah, I can't think of anything. If you can't think of anything, then it's not likely that I would. But,
Well, maybe there's something obvious I'm not thinking of.
I feel like you could have any two of those elements together. It's the three of them.
Three of them together.
All three of them that
tough.
Makes it hard.
Right.
Yeah.
And the kind of sweetness, the kind of the romance is in bolder type than the horror element,
I feel like could we get like a Tim Burton's Wuthering Heights? Like I feel like that could be like maybe along the same line. Like that could be like the third in a trilogy with these.
But there's not enough jokes in Wuthering Heights. Like you need some goofiness.
Yeah, it could be an adaptation. It doesn't have to be.
Yeah. It would be a sparse adaptation. That thing is grim.
I think the humor is.
I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm just saying.
I
think what's lacking there is the whimsy and the humor.
Yeah. That would be the challenge.
It has the romance, it has the Gothic, but where's the whimsical fairy tale side of it? It's missing a third sort of element.
That would be the challenge.
Which is my point.
Could we bring it?
Right. You can get two of those things together. It's that third piece that makes it hard. I don't know. Maybe the next step in the movie club is right. Yeah, maybe we should go the film route and start writing scripts and see if we can come up with something.
Sure, sell them to Tim Burton.
or we've gone too late and we're in the bad idea portion of the episode, and we should quit while we're ahead.
Yeah. Alrighty.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining. We'll be back on September 6th, was it, for Predestination. So please join us then. Read the short story "All You Zombies" by Robert Heinlein too. It's not that long, a few minutes, and be prepared to talk about it because we'll do some comparison there as well. Thank you all for joining. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.